They dared the open seas and patiently bore the brunt of the angry waves. Hungry, thirsty, over fatigue, their bodies were weak, but not their spirit. The journey was long and dangerous, yet they continued sailing on, powered only by one desire: to bring the good news of Christ to the people of the Philippines. The year was 1521. The first Spanish missionaries planted the cross of Christ on Philippine soil.
The book that we're going to review is The Friars of the Philippines, written by Reverend Ambrose Coleman, O.P.
Before we proceed and background of the author, we're going to discuss first the summary or main idea of this book. The summary of this book is the Friars of the Philippines have been fundamental to the westernization of the Philippine archipelago and to Christianity spreading throughout the world. They traveled to these islands in the Far East with the first European explorers and attempted to develop Catholicism under the real patronage of Spain kings. Following the conquistadors who either peacefully placed the Philippines under the rule of the Spanish crown or, instead by war, Spain did not send massive standing armed forces to retain its empire to the east. Men like Miguel Lopez de Legazpi were accompanied by the apostolic zeal of the missionaries and helped to reinforce Hispanic of the Philippines. As de facto conquistadors, the Spanish missionaries won over the islanders' goodwill, portrayed Spain's culture favorably, and thus won around 2 million converts. Commenting on the very tiny standing army that protected the Spanish government in the Philippines, the old viceroy of New Spain was quoted as saying, "En cada fraile tenía el rey en Filipinas un capitán general y un ejército entero." It means, in each friar in the Philippines, the king had captain general and an entire army. Due to the shortage of Spanish officials in the Philippines, most of the time the prior was the only Spaniard in the region. Besides his charitable duties, the prior also had jurisdiction and the governance of the settlement. He oversaw the election of Governor Silio and Head. He was the keeper of the registry of inhabitants of the area. His signature had to be used on all the town's financial documents. The priors also acted as mediators who suppressed insurrections. It was because of the divine role of the prior that people believed and hated him. He was also influential because of his knowledge of the native language and his regular long stay in the region. However, the main idea of the priors of the Philippines is usually focused too much on perception and too little on knowledge. Attacks on the friars are typically characterized by glittering yet baseless generalities, whereas, on the other hand, the defenses of the priors, ecclesiastics, and laymen, both Catholic and Protestant, have in many cases been either imprudent partisan diatribes or verbatim interpretations of ex parte statements by the priors in the islands. In this book, it is suggested that the key historical details on the regime of the priors in the Philippines be provided in the briefest outline with reference to the authorities.
Let's proceed in introduction of the author. The author of this book is Reverend Ambrose Coleman, was born in June 21, 1824 in Dearborn County, Indiana, USA, and married to Lavina Harding on March 22, 1846 in Marion County, Indiana, USA. And sorry for his short background because we saw nothing of his information to know what he are. So now, let's proceed on the main ideas of every chapter of the book. Title of Chapter 1: The Work of the Religious Orders in the Philippines. The first main idea is the 17th century navigator William Dampier, in his own quaint and amusing way, described how the natives and the Spanish colonists of Manila strove to guard against the double danger of earthquakes and typhoons. Second, Christianity has effected a wonderful transformation in the character of the people, softening and refining it as we may judge by the contrast presented by their cruel and bloodthirsty neighbors in Mindanao and the Sulu group, who, nevertheless, belong to the same race, and whose characteristic they must originally have shared. And lastly, Wingfield came across a Dominican missionary who apologized for his bad Spanish on the ground that having lived continuously for 18 years with the natives, speaking Visaya the whole time, he had almost forgotten his own tongue. The title in Chapter 2, The Charges Made Against the Religious Orders Considered, and the main ideas. First is Mr. Halstead made a special journey to Manila to study the situation of the friars. Second is Senor Valdez, with unscrupulous audacity, tries to beslime the character of some of the missionaries by falsely laying to their charge the foulest and most unnatural crimes, which for decency's sake we refrain from detailing. And lastly, Father Damien lived for years in that place of horrors, Molokai, among the lepers, and died a martyr of charity, and, while no Protestant minister was to be found heroic enough to follow his example, one of them, housed in his comfortable bungalow and jealous of his fame, made unfounded charges against him. On the other hand, the title of Chapter 3 is that the rebellion largely the work of secret organization. There have also three main ideas of this chapter, and that is the working of the society in Spain in this century has necessarily been more stealthy and insidious than in France, for there it was face-to-face with truly Catholic population devoted attached to church. Next is when the Freemasonry of the Philippines had gathered these numbers under its banner. The insurrection broke out, and of its 25,000 members, a conspiracy against Spain to the islands themselves, and tried to draw the natives into their nets by giving them important positions in the crops. Chapter 4 is the rebels and their grievances. The Filipinos have already shown proof how far removed they are from civilized ideals and how dangerous it would be to leave them to themselves. By their inhumane treatment of their Spanish prisoners, the Reverend Mr. Ray's opinion of the campaign against Malabog for his refusal to pay taxes, a campaign in which women and children and men bearing flags of truce were fired upon recklessly, is that the Transvaal government was doing a much better work than any Christian missionary has yet to accomplish. God help the Filipinos if Protestant missionaries of this description are going to overrun the field of labor left vacant by the deaths and expulsion of the Spanish friars. And the last chapter is the Sectarian Missionary Movement. The Jesuits too, on their return to the Philippines some 40 years ago, whence they have been banished in the middle of the last century, got an annual subsidy as compensation for the lands they formerly possessed, which had been confiscated by the Spanish government of the day. In Ireland, there is no state church, and yet the national school system is so arranged that religious instruction can be given for half an hour every day of the week.
So, We're done to discuss the main ideas of the book, and now let's proceed the intended purpose of the book and how it contributes to improving academic life. Education and religious are also seen as incompatible. There is an implicit notion within the modern educational establishment that religious belief is backward and counterproductive to enlightenment. Schools have long been seen as gateways to a glorious secular and technological future, free from religious superstition. After all, the aim of education is to make children's careers and colleges ready, not to impart character or moral sentiments. Some educators go to the point of insinuating that the less religious impact the student has, the better. As of the moment, we're going to review what kind of sources that is used in this book. Primary sources is used in this book because Father Coleman was the first to publish the English version of this memorial document addressed to the Spanish colonial minister by the heads of religious orders in the islands, questioning and completely rejecting the investigation of the charges against the orders. And now, we're going to discuss the way of the author approaches this topic. The approaches of Reverend Ambrose Coleman in this book is really deep but easy to understand because it is all about religious and it really makes sense to all of the readers. And it's really interesting to read or know what Christianity's evolved. So, we're going to proceed and evaluate the book's merit. Learn the historical religion here in the Philippines. Usefulness of the book is to remember the things that we need to avoid in this time. The Spanish friars were the crucial elements in the westernizing of the Philippine archipelago and in spreading the Christian faith in the part of the world. They bring here the Christianity.
Part of our book review is the one memorable aspect of this book is that Christianity has effected a wonderful transformation in the character of the people, softening and refining it, and it can be seen in chapter 1. For me, this is the most memorable line in the book because religion is not only a necessary but a very significant part of our lives. Some people are willing even to die for the sake of religion. Ancient tombs, churches, cathedrals, synagogues account for some of the wonders of the world. Some leave aside their profitable business and flourishing careers to follow a godly path. Others renounce the world, their families, and everything they own just to follow some religious beliefs. That's how Christianity could affect our characteristics as a person. And that's all the scope of our book review. Thank you for watching.